Hello friends, I'm Kayla. I read 270 books in the year of 2024. That was a weird way to phrase that. I have most of them behind me. I think this is actually the most that I've ever been missing from a year-end stats video. I think there's only like 240 here, but I read 270. And today's video is about sharing all of my stats with you. Genres that I read, the year that the books were released in. I can't remember the other things that I talk about. Countries, I talk about things that are prevalent on covers and my own ratings, just various things like that. If you want to find out my favorites of the year, my least favorites of the year, those videos exist and I'll link them down below. But right now let's look at the books in some different views. I post a story at the end of every month on Instagram where you can see the covers of all the books that I read, and I organize it loosely by like best to worst. So my best reads are always at the top, my worst reads are typically at the bottom. And then I also post a stack photo to my feed every single month so you can see all of the books that way. All 270 I'm pretty sure are represented in this way. So this is how I will share like the number of stats for you. An average month for me was reading 22 books. The most that I read was in December with 26. Though like technically some of those I read in November. I just waited until I had a video ready to post in December, and so I included them in my December wrap up. And then the least I read was in June with 18 books. I don't really know what was going on in June, but also maybe I did read a couple things in June that I pushed into my July and August stacks because of videos. So these stacks are a lie, but they're mostly accurate. I think June, we were on a trip and then there was a lot of baseball. I had a lot of work to do. Maybe I was dealing with allergies in June. No one cares. What you might care about is what my best and worst reading months were. And my best one was June with only 18 books. I found 5 stars, which is the most of the year. I think June and May, I found 5 stars in each of those. And considering there were multiple months this year, if you look at the ones that only have 1 star associated with them or no stars, like I had some bad months. February to April was a struggle. Due to how I rated everything in every month, I thought I would share my average rating for each month so you can see how they all compare to each other. There were 3 months that I had below a 3-star average rating, which is really sad. Like I said, May and June, out of control with a 4 and a 3.8 average. But I did have 31 5-star reads this year, so I'm gonna take that as a win. It was only, what, 11% of my reading, which is a little depressing. It basically took 9 books. Every 9 books, I found a 5-star this year. So I thought I would just show you a picture of all of my 5s, and I'm gonna include my 4.5s. I'll put them all at the bottom of the picture, just so you have an idea of the things that I loved and I get to highlight them here. There is a video where I share my favorites, and there's a video where I share all of my honorable mentions if you want these books pitched to you. And the first way that I'm going to take all of these books and organize them is by ratings. I like to put them in a stack of ones that I didn't like, so anything below a 3-star. I do also put like a selection of 3 stars in there that just don't feel like they were that impressive to me. The middle stack is usually my biggest, and it's like 3.5 to 4 stars, which is the majority of my reading, is stuff that I like just fine. And then the stack on the right is going to be 4.25s and above. So this is how all of the numbers compare. I moved my TV stand out of the way and just put the books on the floor for my own safety. And you can see my, I just showed you a picture, but my dislike pile is so much bigger than my love pile. The biggest one is in the middle. There is approximately, like once you factor in the ones that I'm missing, there's 130 likes, the middle one. There's 100 dislikes, and there's 44 loves. Last year, I read the exact same amount of books, and my dislikes and loves were even. So this just lays out for you how my reading year felt. Like so many things that were good, a few things I really feel passionately about, and just a lot of flops. I'm actually gonna film a video for my channel members discussing my reading year a little bit more, goals for the future, and why I think my reading year was a mess. There is this one stack in the middle that I actually want to highlight because I've taken so many opportunities to talk about my 4.5 and 5 stars, but there's a stack of 4 stars that I enjoyed. And if you're somebody who likes the weirder stuff that I tend to like, I look at these and think these could have been favorites. These should have been favorites of mine, and they would be my top recommendations for if you liked stuff in that stack this I think could also be big wins for you. A lot of novellas in here: The Iliac Crest, Your Shadow Half Remains, and Such Small Hands. Delilah S. Dawson's novellas, Guillotine and Bloom. Earth Eater and The Night Guest. Some gothic things, Woodworm and Ein Hollow. These ones I always recommend in tandem because they're kind of gross. The Eyes of the Best Part and Mayfly. Lonely Castle in the Mirror and A Botanical Daughter. Boys in the Valley and Hawk Mountain. The Wonder State is something that's stuck in my mind a lot. And then some sci-fi, The Vanished Birds and The Measure. Taking into account all of my ratings, the actual average rating that I had of the year is a 3.4. It's the lowest I've ever had. I said earlier in the year, I'm pretty sure my average is going to be a 3.5, which is the same as it was my first year of BookTube. And it's gone up and down, but like stayed within 3.7, 3.6, 3.8. I'm at a 3.4. I mean, it's not a surprise, that number, I guess, when you look at the stack. But I never consider my rereads as a part of my ratings because these are just things that I already know the rating going into them, and I don't count them towards like my overall feelings because they're just things that I feel like I'm doing on the side. So I did have 8 rereads this year, which I mean wouldn't affect that average rating too much anyway. My favorite rereads, I guess Dune and Dune Messiah, because that was the first time I ever reread them. The Book, The Most Precious Substance. And obviously rereading The Raven Cycle is super fun. I did an entire spoiler vlog series for my channel members. We had a live show. It was so much fun reliving these and like discussing them so thoroughly. And since 4 of those are from the same author, Maggie Stiefvater, I thought I would do next the authors that I've read from the most this year. So there's a lot of authors I read from 2 times. I read 2 Brandon Sandersons, 2 Shauna Maguires, 2 Benjamin Stevensons, 2 from Kimberly Lemming, Deanna Raybourn, Hanif Abdurraqib, S.T. Gibson, Yoko Agawa, Laura Lynn Page, Percival Everett, Frank Herbert, Sylvia Marina Garcia, Carrie Maniscalco, Delilah S. Dawson, Karina Holly, and Grady Hendricks. And then I read 3 books this year from Eric LaRocca and 4 from Maggie Stiefvater and Stephen Graham Jones as well. I read 102 books by authors that I had read before, and 168 were new to me. So the stack is clearly bigger. I feel like every time you cut to me, I'm gonna look more and more disheveled and the lighting's gonna change because it's taking me a while to figure out these stacks. But yeah, I read a lot of authors that I was reading again. 100 of them. I think 80 of the 100 were ones that I was genuinely like, I've liked this author before and I want to read from them again. 20 were kind of experimental. I didn't love that author before, but let's see how it goes this time. And then the new stuff was just authors with like really interesting concepts, or I read that weren't on my TBR because I had to read them for a video concept. Going to this stack of ones that I've read from before, let me actually highlight the ones that are authors that I was reading and giving another chance to, just to prove to myself that that is a good idea. Just kidding, I put this one in a different stack. I've read from Colson Whitehead before and didn't love it. This is now my favorite Colson Whitehead, The Underground Railroad. Everyone always hypes up Nat Cassidy and I just didn't connect with anything, but Rest Stop was very fun. I know this, The Handyman Method, is not everybody's favorite, not anybody's favorite, but this is definitely my favorite Nick Cutter that I've read. I'm glad I read Delilah S. Dawson again after not loving the violence. I'm really glad that I tried Gwendolyn Keist again because I liked one of her books last year. I gave it a 3, and now one of her books is a favorite of the year, The Haunting of Elkwood. And then of course authors that I knew that I loved already, but I have a new favorite from them. I think I have a new favorite, Stephen Graham Jones with I Was a Teenage Slasher, and my favorite Deanna Raybourn is now A Dangerous Collaboration for now. And because the universe wants balance, I also read a bunch of authors that I loved, and I read my least favorite book that I've ever read from them this year. But we're not going to focus on the negatives. We'll continue to be positive. From the authors that I was reading for the first time, actually in my top 10, or top 9 of the year rather, 7 of those 9, this was the first time I've ever read from this author. Some because they were debuts, some because I've just never gone into their backlist before. I'm most looking forward to reading more from Neil Sharpson. And then outside of my top 10 other 5 stars that I gave, I'm really looking forward to reading more from Percival Everett. I read this and James. I'm interested in reading more Alif Shafak because I know she has stuff people have recommended, and Marjan Kamali. I've had things recommended from her as well. So I have much to look forward to in the future of my reading. And actually, speaking of these ones, these are some that I was recommended directly from you, so that just shows I need to take more 5-star predictions from my audience. My most unexpected 5 stars this year were these ones because I'd never really heard of them. And then also all of the books that I read in the trying to find a 5-star from every year I've been alive, there was so much that I probably never would have picked up without that video series. So The Memory Police, Shadow of the Wind, Fingersmith, just to name a few. I'm absolutely destroying these stacks. And these also came from recommendations and ideas from the comments as I was going through that video series. So thank you for all of your suggestions. Next, I'm going to organize by age range, which every year feels a little less important. But if I ever want to do, I mean, I should do like a 10-year comparison of stats, but I've always tracked the age ranges, and it is interesting to see the YA stat completely dwindle. So quickly, I'll pull out the 13 YA books that I read this year, and you can see them in their own little stack on the side. So that's 5% of my reading in that stack right there. I don't have this stat from my first year on BookTube, 2015. I didn't do it in my end of year stats. I didn't keep track of that. But in 2016 I did, and I had 60% YA books and 40% adult books. So that's how things compare from when I started my channel to now. And 4 of those are rereads, and that's never gonna change. I'm always gonna have at least 4 because I'm gonna be rereading The Raven Cycle. Now let's organize by length of book. I don't know why I do this because I have to look at every single book as I go through and try to organize it. So this time I'm gonna do it just a little more loosely, and I'll have a stack of anything that looks like it's over 400 pages. My stack in the middle from 250 to 400 pages, and on the left, anything that's under or around 250 pages. So 30% of the books that I was reading this year were short. I would consider short books. A third of my reading totally makes sense. 57% of my reading was average size books, and 13% was books over 400 pages. And just like last year, I said this exact same thing last year, and the stacks were identical last year. I love that these 2 stacks are the same size. They're such different percentages, but I spent the same amount of time with long books as short books. Yet I obviously read so many more short books. And it's weird the amount of things that I hated in this stack, and for me to think back on the amount of time I spent with these long books that weren't going well and I just didn't give up on. But there are also some really good ones here. Some favorites here. The longest book that I read and the shortest book, I put them both near the top. I had some foresight pre-planning because this is about to collapse. The longest was 898 pages with 2666, which was a 5-star for me. So shout out to the good long books. And the shortest book that I read was 88 pages. I wonder if I calculated that right, because some of these feel shorter. I read a lot of things under 100 pages, and this was one of my least favorites, Conversation of Three Wayfarers, so good thing it was short. In total, I read 81,772 pages, and speaking about last year and comparing to last year with the stacks, to compare the page count last year, in 2023, I read 81,780. Isn't that so crazy? I know I read the exact same amount of books, but it shouldn't be the exact same amount of pages. I read exactly 8 pages less this year than last year, which is just so weird to me. The average size book that I read was 302 pages. If we do the math with that 81,000, I read about 224 pages a day. I don't feel like that's crazy. I think I say this every year. It looks like I read so much. I know I read so much, but it's like 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day. Some people scroll on TikTok for 3 hours a day. So anybody whoever comes at me with like, you read too much. How do you read so much? I just don't consume other media. Obviously, of course, I'm so lucky and privileged to consider this a job. So I do associate some of this with like work time. So as far as reading books for content, I did the math. I'm not going to do this in an organization, but I read 60 books this year that I would have never read without a video project. And some of them were great things for me to discover I never would have read. Actually, this one was never on my TBR. I probably never would have gotten to this if not for the New York Times Best Books of the Century video. But I do think that that's an interesting stat, is that 60 books I never would have read. That means over 200 books that I read this year were because I wanted to. I know I do a lot of conceptual and themed vlogs. Most of those books are from my actual TBR and things that I want to read. Do I think without my channel I still would have read like 200 books in the year? Probably not, but it's nice to know that over 200 books were actively on my TBR that I wanted to read. As far as how I consumed them, a quick stat for that, 42 books I listened exclusively to as audiobooks, 149 I read exclusively physically, and 77 were a mix. So I'll read the first chapter this way, the next chapter that way. I don't really do a lot of tandem reading these days where I'm listening and reading physically at the same time. It's usually like when I'm in the car, I'm gonna pop in a couple chapters that I was in the middle of like physically reading a book that day. And I think there were 2 ebooks. I wanna say 2 ebooks. So there's a pie chart I'm sure that you're looking at. Now let's take a digital look at everything while I organize these into the next thing, which is gonna be genre. I love to put together this digital graphic. You might have watched my last vlog of the year, which was reading for the aesthetics, just so I could make this perfectly even. I have the exact right amount of rows and columns for it to look nice together. There's a page of red books. You can see how many red books I read, and then orange books and yellow books. I read a lot of brown, beige books. There's a black and white page, but it does have a lot of like other colors sprinkled in there. We've got a green selection of books, like a tealy, aqua, moving into blue, and then we have a full blue page, purples and pinks. And then I do have one page that is like too many colors to just put on one of the color pages. So that's all the covers of all of the books that I read this year. And actually, let me pull up all of my favorite covers of the year, because I was gonna do the bookish survey. I actually filmed it and I don't really care to post it. It was kind of boring. But I did talk about my favorite covers, and I just wanted to show you all of them here so you can enjoy the pretty covers and tell me if you agree with any of them or not. My top read genre this year was horror. Then we had fantasy, and then general fiction, mystery following that, romance, and then nonfiction, science fiction, anthologies, and historical. I don't know the percentages myself right now speaking to you, but I will pop them on the screen in editing. I definitely was on a hunt to find horror books that I loved this year, so it makes sense it was the top. You'd think this is my top genre normally, but I think fantasy beats it out most times. And though my mystery stack's a little bit questionable because like there's some historical mystery, so I didn't know what stack to put them in. There's some things in the romance category that should be in the anthology category, but they're just so much more romance. But these are the stacks that I decided to put them in today. So that's how everything works out. If we look at that photo of my top reads of the year, the 5s and the 4.5 stars, or actually maybe I'll put up a graphic instead just to show you what genres those landed in, because I think that's interesting. Horror was definitely the most successful, which is great because I was reading it a lot. Fiction was the next, then mystery. Nonfiction was good, science fiction was good. Fantasy was probably the biggest flop compared to how many I actually read of the year. And then romance was like the worst, but that was kind of to be expected. I guess the absolute worst is short story collections, because unless I love every single story in it, I can't give it a 5. So it's just naturally not gonna end up in a favorites list. With that said though, I did actually read some really bad ones this year. Like it wasn't that they were just okay. Some were okay, but a lot of them were bad. And if we put up a graphic, let's do a graphic of the amount of that genre I read versus the amount of favorites that I had in that genre. So you can see which ones match up. Like it declines similarly, but this one, it's more obvious that fantasy and romance were objectively the flops. Now let's touch on series. I read 50 books that belong to a series this year. So I'm not primarily a series reader, but I did start quite a few, some of them not even knowing that they were series. 24 brand new series were started this year, and most I don't plan to read on with, but that's normal for me. I'm considering continuing on with the Quicksilver series, Lore of the Wilds. Those ones aren't out yet, but we'll see. Feybound and Parable of the Sower, those sequels are out, and I might continue on someday. I'll definitely continue in Magnolia Parks, the Dark Lord series, the Vacation series, Vera Wong probably. I was questioning it for a bit, but I think I'm going to. There are 12 that I continued on in the series this year. I don't know, I think I might be done with the Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone mystery and the Chloe Gong Immortal series. I'm still going with everything else here. In these books, I've caught up mostly with the series. The ones I enjoyed most were Veronica Speedwell. Finley Donovan like has me curious now to continue on in it. I liked how this kind of quartet wrapped up, and I'm interested to see where it goes. I'm always interested in the Wayward Children series. I didn't love the Emily Wilde or Tidal Creatures series that like historically, I love the first book in those series so much, but I will continue to read them as I'm committed to the series. And then I completed a couple series. There's the Zapped and the Zinnias, which I didn't actually read the rest of it, but I read the last book. If Moon of the Turning Leaves is the last book in this series, I finished it. Apparently All for the Game, like I thought was done, but maybe it's not done, but it might be a spin-off, so I consider that a completed series. And lastly, for the organization, I'm gonna put it into 2 stacks, books that were released in 2024 and books that weren't. In total, 75 of the books that I read in 2024 were published in 2024, which is the identical percentage as last year. 28% of my reading was brand new, 72% was older. So as far as this year being a bit of a flop, we can't blame it totally on brand new releases. I know everyone's talking about how books are being published are not as good as they used to be. I don't know if I can state anything for fact. And what I can say is of the around 50 that I showed you of my favorites, 33% of them came from 2024 releases. So a little over a quarter of my reading was from this year, but a third of my favorites were from this year. But if you look at it by itself, everything from 2024, 2/3 of this were flops. There's actually a lot more here than I thought there would be. I thought I was reading less and less new releases every year. And maybe it's not that. Maybe it's just that my releases are getting older. So my average, like if I was splitting into 2, brand new and older, this stack used to be primarily like 1 to 5 years in the past. But now, because I was reading so many older titles, like 10, 20, 50 years in the past, it feels like I've been reading older stuff, and I have over here. But there's such a big stack here. I read a lot of new releases. So let me tell you really quickly ones that I haven't mentioned so far that I think are worth your time. If you're looking for a new fun mystery thriller series to follow, these are the first releases of series that are to come. This is It's Elementary by Elise Bryant and Every Time I Go on Vacation Someone Dies by Catherine Mack. If you're looking for a thriller or a mystery that doesn't rely on gimmicks and plot twists and crazy stuff, it's just about exploring what's happening to people, Night Watching by Tracy Sierra and The God of the Woods by Liz Moore, 2 of my book club picks, were really good. Plus then you can watch the live show after as I discussed it with my co-hosts. A really good historical fiction was The Lying Women of Tehran, and a really good general fiction with a little bit of speculative stuff is The Husbands. If you already love Tia Williams and Emily Henry, these seem to be going over well with the general public. I gave them both a 3, but I would definitely recommend A Love Song for Ricky Wilde and Funny Story. And then I think a good solid romance that's not getting enough hype is The Truth According to Ember by Danica Nava. I didn't love any romance this year. Nothing got a 5-star, but that one was a 3.75. If you want to learn about the moon, there's a new one by Rebecca Boyle about the moon. If you want to learn about sharks, there's one from Jasmine Graham all about sharks. If you want to learn about the history of medicine regarding women's bodies, All in Her Head by Elizabeth Coleman. And then collections of essays I really liked, Dinner on Monster Island by Tanya de Rosario and Magical Realism by Vanessa Angelica Villarreal were very good. Some horrors that came out this year. This one made it to my top 10. We Used to Live Here by Marcus Cleaver. This is like a top recommendation of mine because it seems to be one of the most objectively agreed upon horrors of the year that most people like. And 2 that didn't quite make my top 10 are Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay and The Center by Aisha Manazir Siddiqui. They both got 5 stars. Some horror novellas you might be into. Rest Stop by Nat Cassidy and Pocket Knife Kitty by Shannon Riley. These are both pretty gross. And a gothic novel, A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock. I think people could be really into. This next stat I'm just going to show you in a pie chart. It's where the books came from. I like to know how many things I read off of my physical TBR that I've owned for at least a year before reading, or anything that I bought in the current year to read, plus the library. So most things I indeed bought. I clearly, like this whole stack, I bought brand new, so I had to have bought those. I think it was half of my reading that I purchased. And then I read, I want to say it was 40 to 50 books off of my physical TBR, which is like a 1/5 of my overall reading, which doesn't feel great, but like the number sounds good. I read 50 books off of my physical TBR. Not a lot of them were great, but I did. I borrowed a lot from the library, and there were a chunk of things that I read purely online, like the 30 books that I'm missing here. I probably just listened to the audiobook, or actually no, I borrowed from the library and then I couldn't get it back because I was reading things that are in demand. Quickly talking about content, because I got this little update just today from YouTube that told me a few stats about my channel this year. It told me how many comments I got, how many likes I got, how many views I got. 4.6 million views. I have no idea how that compares to other years, but that seems crazy. And I uploaded 200 videos. That's the most interesting thing to me because that number is great. And it makes me realize how many things I must have uploaded to members, because I know that I did exactly 52 sit-down videos this year. I did one per week. There were wrap-ups, there were quarterly wrap-ups, there was various recommendation videos, there was talking about upcoming releases that were interesting, seasonal TBRs, whatever else I'm showing on the screen. And then I know I did 48 public vlogs. There was the series that I was doing where I was finding a 5-star from every year I've been alive. There was lots of 5-star predictions going in my TBR closet. I read haunted house books, I read shark books, I read werewolf books, dinosaur books, and then some more experimental ones where like I read a whole bunch of books for the New York Times list. I read a bunch of books for the Goodreads Awards list. I know I did 10 public live shows for my Literally Dead book club. And then everything else was member related. There were spoiler vlogs. There's a lot of live shows. We do a lot of reading sprints, movie nights, book clubs. I'm actually wondering if that number counts everything that I still have up, or like maybe, because 200 seems so high, maybe it's counting times that I like uploaded a video and then had to delete it because of copyright and then like edit it and re-upload it. Does it count anytime like I go on StreamYard and I do a test live show, because my microphone and camera were acting up this year and I had to test them a few times. Anyway, thanks to YouTube for that little summary. There was only 19 books this entire year that I didn't vlog or turn into content. I still like mention them in my wrap-ups, but it's such a small percentage of things that I just read like on my own time and didn't vlog, even though the majority of what I was reading like was on my TBR. I just know that it gets less and less every single year. Last year it was 37 things, this year it was 19. Now let's get into cover trends. I love looking at covers and talking about what is featured on the covers and then also the titles. As I run there's two different reading challenges happening this year about reading things that have a certain word in the title, certain picture on the cover. So I like to look at the trends. So 15% of the covers had people on them. And then well, that's kind of an always one that I see. And then usually there's lots of animals. There was plenty this time, sharks and dinosaurs, which makes sense with my videos. And then lots of wolves, but also snakes and birds, dogs and cats, foxes, rabbits, even an armadillo. There's always like moons, so many moons everywhere. 8% of the books that I read had moons on the cover. Also a whole lot of foliage, flowers and trees and just general nature. So pretty. A lot of books on book covers. If you're looking for that for one of the buzzword challenges, here's some recommendations. Well, not that I love them all, but you know what I mean. I always see a lot of houses, and this time there was also a selection of like inside people's houses. And I thought that was interesting to note trend-wise. There was a good amount of food and drink on the things that I was reading. I'm in my eyeball era, so naturally that showed up a lot. There was lots of water, lots of bodies of water, and 3 lighthouses that I noticed. There's weapons and bones showing up more than normal. 9 disembodied hands, which I always see and is a favorite of mine. 3 Ferris wheels, 2 ladders, 3 hourglasses. And then just one of my favorite design things that I've been seeing a lot lately is torn and damaged book covers. Ones that look like something is coming through the pages or digging into the design. I love that. As far as titles, some were as common as they normally are. There was lots of colors. I saw black 5 times, blue 3 times, brown 2 times, and then jade, red, gold, emerald, and silver. I saw a lot of numbers from 172 hours to 10 minutes 38 seconds to just the number 1. That showed up 6 times. I noticed dark 5 times in my book titles, Dark Fever to How to Become the Dark Lord. I saw night 4 times, from Book of Night to Middle of the Night. And then all types of women, lion women, lone women, house women, and then plenty of time mentions. 2 times in That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon series, which I love. And then sisters showed up 3 times. Sisters of the Lost Nation, Volt Sisters, Summer Sisters. The woods were mentioned 5 times, sometimes a part of other words and sometimes on their own. God of the Woods, The Haunting of Belk Wood. And then 3 times I saw Valley, which I definitely noticed as I was reading, because I feel like that is one that doesn't show up very much. I wouldn't put it in a challenge for someone to find because I don't think it's that common, but it was common in my reading. And then lastly, countries and where authors have come from or countries that I visited. Translated works, I read more translated books than I ever have this year, so here's the selection of all of those. And then I read from authors all over the world. Some countries that I visited or that the authors hail from include Pakistan, Taiwan, South Africa. I think I skipped Nigeria when I was doing this. Korea, Argentina, Japan, Indonesia, Germany, Singapore, Australia, Ireland, Turkey, Denmark, Scotland, France, Wales, Jamaica, Spain, Vietnam, Mexico, Norway, Chile, Italy, Iceland, the Philippines, Canada, USA, Palestine, and New Zealand. I feel like maybe this was the most I traveled around the world, but I would have to fact check myself. And those are all of my reading stats for 2024. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Well, for me, it was a lot longer that I've been sitting here on the floor. My back hurts. It was probably a much shorter video than it feels like. But just know, I spent the whole day with you, even if you only spent like 10 here with me. But thank you very much for tuning in and listening to me talk about all of my nerdy stats for the year. If there's any stat that you find particularly interesting that you want to share yours with me, I would love to hear it. And I will see you in the next video.